Hi, I'm Mark Rutten. Welcome back to Nomad Boatbuilding. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about screwing up. The day has come. I can finally take this thing off the mold. There's really nothing much more I can do on this side. I could put the stem band on, but I don't have the material on hand yet. And sometimes, before I even get a boat off the mold, I like to actually go so far as to even put a coat of primer on it or oil or whatever is going to be on there. I'm not really at that stage. I still have fasteners to put into the planking, a few other little things that I need to do. So to get this boat off the strong back, I need to roll it over. And I can do it myself, but it always poses some risks. And we're having a little party at the house, so I'm just going to take advantage of that and get an extra couple of hands to help me roll this thing over later on tonight. Leading up to that, there's a few things I can do to prep this. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut away all of the frames except for the midship one. I can remove the cross balls, I could chop the frames down shorter so they're not in the way, and I can release the boat from the strong back. There's just a couple screws. There's one screw in the stem, another couple in the transom that are holding it in place. When I have people here later on, all we got to do is take those out, flip the boat over, and have a little toast. There we go. So I just got a couple screws to pop off. Alright, so there's a couple of sleepers on this frame down here, so that we're going to set it on top of those, but they're not screwed down, so I'm just saying.
So they should stay?
Yeah, they'll stay. Yeah, so
but they could fall over is what I think of what I'm hearing.
That's what you're hearing too.
So we're going to have to kind of drop it down, then
yeah.
so we drop it
this way or
drop
this way? Or like that?
I think if we drop it down
Yeah,
and then pick it up and slide it
yeah,
back,
sounds good.
because then we have space
Yeah.
here, but he says there's more space on that side.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not going to be heavy, but just bulky.
Okay.
Oh, drop it a little bit. There. Yeah, you got it.
Okay, I don't have it. Anybody got it on that side?
I got it.
Okay.
Sweet!
Yeah, that's not a one-person job.
You'd be surprised how many times I've had to do that one person.
Push it, hey guys.
Nice.
Everybody save up their pennies.
That's right.
We'll have races.
Okay, we've got the boat rolled over, and this is always an exciting time in any project. Now the first impression I have as I stand here looking at it from this view is how heavy the shear plank looks. Now I had always intended to make the first broad here a little bit wider, and that's to sort of ease the transition from the really wide garboard up to the narrower topside planks. With the wide shear plank, it makes the midland plank, we'll call it, look quite narrow. So what we're going to end up doing here is we're going to put a rub rail on the outside. That rub rail is going to take away that extra width, basically. So that gives me plenty of elbow room to sort of pick and choose just how wide my rub rail is going to be in order to tweak that shape. So all in all, I'm quite happy with how things look here. And it's all looking really good, except for, I'm almost embarrassed to show this, really ugly blowouts where my nails came through my transom. When I designed this dory, I gave it a 1-inch thick transom, which seemed like it would be plenty. However, once I got down to building it, I discovered the hard way that it just wasn't quite thick enough. Whenever you have a real raking transom interacting with planking at the back sides, there's actually not a lot of material to fasten to. Because you're trying to fasten perpendicular to the plank, you have to be careful that you have enough meat for those fasteners to hang on to. And 1 inch was not enough. I thought it might be, but in practice it wasn't. Despite trying to avoid this, I had a few nails that broke through on the inside of my transom. I tried everything to try and avoid it. I was careful about setting my pilot drill depth just right. I was careful about nipping my fasteners off. But the fact of the matter is, you never quite know exactly the path that your nail's going to take. And as a result, I had a few nails that popped through. They look horrible. And I could fix them by just puttying over these things with thickened epoxy. This is supposed to be a painted boat, and that could be fine, but I don't like to leave it like that. I like to fix things nicely. Mistakes happen. We have to own up to them. And a good craftsman does their best to try and take their mistake, learn from it, and then repair it in such a way that hopefully there's actually an improvement. I need to put these fasteners back in. I've pulled them out, but I need to put them back, and I want to make sure they have enough meat to do so. So I think adding an extra 1/2 inch material onto here should do the job nicely. Dories have this doubler up here, which is standard on Grand Banks dory. Below that doubler, I'm going to actually make up a piece of Douglas fir, and I'm going to carefully fit it down and glue it in place over top of this. Basically, I'm going to thicken this up by 1/2 inch, and then this doubler up here is going to hide the fact that I did anything at all, because you probably won't notice the difference in thickness between the doubler and the piece down here and then the bit that sticks out above. So that'll be my fix. We try not to make mistakes. We try to learn from our mistakes, but some mistakes are such that there's no getting around them, and this was one of them. The mistake was the transom was too thin and the margins were too small for me to not make the same mistake over and over again, which really pisses me off, but that's life. We'll get over it. Now the trick is trying to fit a piece of material into this situation is actually fairly tricky. We've got fairly steep bevels coming down here and long tapers, and so I need to do something we call spiling. Now, spiling is really just another term for making patterns. And in boat building, when we do that, the term spiling often means that we're also taking into account bevels and material thickness. Okay, so now I need to figure out how to spile to create a piece of material that's going to fit in here. What I thought I'd do, I'm going to do it in 2 pieces. I'm going to book match it because it's going to be a lot easier to try and fit 2 pieces in and then glue a joint up the center than it is to try and fit 1 piece in. So I've just got some scrap here, and this is 1/4 inch thick. I decided I'm going to add a 1/2 inch to this transom. I want it to be nesting tightly against my transom face here. I've got this other piece of material that I've tapered off, and I'm just going to lay it on top. I'm creating a template that is the full thickness of my finished material. This is a square corner, so I don't need to worry about the full thickness there, but over here against the planking, I do have to worry about whether or not I've made this pattern so that it takes into account where this finished piece is going to wind up. Okay, so I've cut the end. It's not quite square, it's pretty close, but what I'm running into here is now it's butting up against my knee down here, and that's no good. But I'm just going to take my utility knife and whittle some away on the inside. Get rid of some of that material thickness. Now what I want to do is I want to make sure I'm touching the bottom of the boat. So if I do that, and then right there I'm touching. Got some thick cyanoacrylate, put a few little drops on. And I'm going to give this guy a blast. And my trick is to get this into place just so, quickly, before that glue sets. Right there. Okay, now I got another little piece that's been beveled back, so this is going to match the top of this here. So again, I'll just give myself a couple drops. Get this guy. And the trick is to get it touching just so. There we go. Okay, so down here I need to mark my center line. That's important right there. And then I'll do the same thing up at the top of my pattern. Okay, now this is lap strike planking, and that means that there's sort of a little jog here at every one of these plank laps. Some people like to jog their transom around those laps. It's an awful lot of work, and I don't think I'm going to do it in this case. But if I did want to do it, the way I would record that most easily is to probably just take something like some business cards and just glue those along those jogs right there. I've only spiraled to one side of this. That's because trying to fit this thing accurately is going to be rather frustrating if I have to try and deal with both sides at the same time. So what I decided to do is I'm going to be making this in 2 pieces anyway, split up the middle, and I'll glue those together in place when I put it all together. What I want to know next is whether or not I can use this spiling to make the parts for this side. If I pull this out, of course I've got this bevel I put on the back side, and this has got a bevel on it. I could drop it down in here, and that's all well and good, but you can see how this is out by 2 inches practically here. I need to know if this is going to fit a 1/2 inch protruding out from the face of that transom. And so the way I'll do that is I'm just going to use my 4-fold carpenter's rule here, and I'll just lay it down on the surface of the transom and use that as a standoff. And if I'm careful, I can just slide my pattern down on top of that rule. And that looks good. I'm touching my knee right there, so that's good. I'm touching all the way around there nicely. And up here, it's hard to tell because there might be a little bit of play in this. This looks like it's hitting just proper right up here at the top too. So that's great. What that means is I can make a book-matched piece of material in order to create this overlay. And all I have to do is fit both sides and then worry about coming up with a joint up the center that matches both of them. Okay, so that's just one method of spiling, and it's more pattern making than spiling. Now, another way we could be doing this is I could be just using a very rough cut piece of door skin. And then I would create what's called a spiling block, which is just a little piece of material like this. You want to make sure that this edge and this edge are parallel to each other, and one face is beveled off nicely to be a steeper bevel than the area you're dealing with. Now, the thickness of this and the thickness of the material you use to create your spiling need to match the finished thickness of the thing you want to fit. In this case, this overlay I want to create is a 1/2 inch thick, and so what I need to do is make sure that this is 3/8 of an inch thick, and then a 1/8 door skin pattern, which will give me my 1/2 inch. And then the way you would use this is you would lay this down onto your door skin, you'd slide this up to the surface that you're trying to record, and then you would create a line down here. Usually you put a couple of tick marks on there so it's easier to see. And we do that all the way along, recording all the different little details. And you could be recording these little jogs too, after a fashion. And then you would take that piece of door skin, you'd lay it on your stock that you want to make something out of, and we would flip this over basically to the other side, and then record that line onto the finished stock. And that works fine too. But in this situation, this is such a tight space that I would never get that in there very easily. And so this little method of pattern making using this sort of stacking method of materials is going to work much, much better. This piece of material is basically this piece of material. It's just glued in place. I don't have to move it around. Okay, so I've got a little piece of material here that'll do this job nicely. So we'll start the job sharpening up our pencil. We'll sharpen our pencil with a nice long flat spot on one side. I'm not going to be book matching this exactly. This is more a technique we refer to as board stretching. And the idea is that I'm going to take one piece out of this end of the board, and then I'm going to flip this over like so, and I'll get the other piece out of the other end of the board. And then these two faces with the flat grain will get glued up along the center line. I could do it the other way too. I could, if I felt like it, gone for running these two surfaces against the flat grain, and then along the center line we would get this grain that would come together in sort of a radiating pattern. And that actually might not be a terrible idea, given that there's quite a bit of difference in grain quality between this edge and this edge. The growth rings are quite different, and by matching them up down the center, they will be more closely aligned in terms of shape. So maybe I'll do it. Maybe I actually will do that. That might not be a crazy idea. I want to align my pattern up here, give myself a little bit of room to trim away. On my plank, I gotta look for my snipe. So right around about 2 inches back from the ends, my planer leaves a little bit of a snipe. And so I generally want to stay away from that because it'll not be in the same plane as the rest. So I'm just going to joggle my pattern up close to that snipe. Like, there's no point in coming right up to the edge here because you might find that it doesn't quite match up with your shape exactly. So you're better off just leaving a little bit of a pencil mark. You'll actually find it have an easier time of getting it all to fit if you got a little pencil mark to follow. So tracing along there carefully. We have our end cut, which is fairly critical. And then this is very critical too, along the haunch here. This is going to be the toughest part to get things to line up, is along that haunch where the transom knee is. And then using the flat part of your pencil here, this is where you want, this is why we do this. So this pattern doesn't touch the wood down here at the bottom corner, so I need to project my line straight down. And so that's why we have that flat face, for projecting our lines straight down. And my pattern stops a little short, so I'll have to extend that line. And then of course over here I want to mark where my center line is at both ends. And I'm just going to give myself a little bit of a margin of wiggle room. So I'll add maybe a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch on the inside there. That'll give me room to make sure this gets tweaked properly, and then I can trim that off later on. So there's the one side. And of course I've got that center line there. I'll just grab a scrap of wood to mark that down. So that's theoretically the finished spot right there, but I'm just going to draw a line outside of that. And as I say, I'll give myself 1/8 of an inch. I'll be generous. It's actually easier to have a little more material to trim off later on. There's nothing fun about trying to run a bandsaw right up to follow along an edge. It can all jump off and make a mess of it. I'm just going to sweeten up that line a little. And then down here, I'll sweeten up this line. Make sure this, if you're using a stick for this, that guy's not quite as straight as it could be. Make sure you're using something that's straight. Even this ruler's got a little bit of a wiggle to it. I'm not too worried, but and then I want to square off of that face for the bottom. Now I'll do this side, and the thing to remember is when we pull these out and use them in the boat, we need to make sure that we are beveling in the right direction so that they are a match. That would be a bad thing if you bevel them off in the same way. And then haunch. Center line. Center line. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start by cutting these out nice and square to the line and cleaning up to that line nice and square, and then I'll worry about doing my bevels. I want to take a moment to thank all of my followers on Patreon whose generous support allows me to make these videos. In particular, I want to thank my latest followers, Dan Walker and Thomas Langford. I'd also like to give a shout out to Paul on San Juan Island. Paul reached out to me and told me he wanted to support my channel but was uncomfortable with using an online subscription service. And a couple of days ago I received a letter in the mail with some money in it. Paul had even gone to the trouble of securing Canadian funds. Paul, thank you very much. I really appreciate that, and it was a really nice little present to get. If you'd like to support this channel, you can make a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can join me on Patreon. There's a link in the description or up in the corner. You can also support this channel simply by subscribing, liking, and sharing these videos. And for everybody's support in every which way that it comes, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, so here's our blank. This is our finished side. And because of the way this was cut, this was on the bottom side of the bandsaw. And so this edge here is just a little on the rough side. So I think what I want to do is I'm going to start by beveling off for my planking side here. And I'm going to drop it down into place. And I have a feeling that I've got a little bit of material that I'm going to be able to trim off in here, and so I can actually scribe this guy to fit against the knee quite nicely, I think, if I go that route. So that's the approach I'm going to take. So my first job is to just bevel off this edge to match the planking, and I'm a little oversized here because I did that on purpose, so I've got a little bit of material to work with. Always take a moment to make sure you've got the correct side figured out, and take a moment to go and check your bevels in the boat before you start cutting. So there's my bevel angle, and I'm just going to use my finger to draw myself a little guideline here. This is just to keep me in the ballpark while I'm doing my majority of my planing. So I'm just going to use my smoothing plane here to get this beveling, the bulk of this done quickly. You can hear that screeching. A little lubrication on my sole will help with that. Now I'm within about 1/8 of an inch of my guidelines, and at this point it's always a good idea to just take your bevel gauge and check against it and see how close you are. And I can see that I'm a little steep. I got to angle this a little farther. Once you get that bevel right, you want to slow right down, make sure you don't lose it. This is set for a fairly coarse cut, so I'll probably switch to my block plane any minute here. Again, just checking my work carefully. Every now and then it's a good idea to go back to the boat, make sure your bevel gauge is still accurate. Okay, and I'm there. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to deal with the bevel at the very tip here and here at the haunch. Because if I don't have those done, this won't be able to sit down into its final resting place properly. So again, I'm going to go back to the boat. I'm using my bevel square. I've got one bevel already marked out for this particular location. And I'll take another one at the top of the knee. So there's the top of the knee right there. So I'm just going to leave that rough for the moment. I want to put this into the boat and see how it looks. Just going to quickly clean up this bevel here first. This fur I'm using has got really coarse grain, so it's a little difficult to work with. We want to make sure that we don't have any humps on the back side of this bevel here. But you could even undercut it a little bit. This is going to get epoxied in place, and so any voids will get filled. There we go. That should work pretty good. Nice. Okay, let's go pop this into the boat and see how it fits. That'll be our first fitting. Generally, it's a good idea to just sort of bevel off the back edge here, just a hair, just in case there's any glue filleting out any corners that's holding you up. It's dropping in relatively tight. I'd like to get it a little tighter to my planking here, so I back it off and hold it up against. What it's telling me is that my bevel is off by a little bit still. So it's looking good right down at the tip, but farther back I'm not tight against the transom face, but I'm not touching at the planking, so I need to tweak that bevel. Bevels don't always lie consistent throughout the length of the transom because each plank is providing a slightly different angle. So there's never going to be one consistent bevel that works perfectly. But all in all, things look really good. This joint right here lines up quite nicely. But I think what I'll do is I'll get the bevel against the planking fitting nice, and then this joint will probably change a little bit, and we'll tweak it until it all fits well. Okay, I've got this fitting fairly nicely. I've put a little downward pressure, and the joint here is pretty tight. I might need to take another swipe or two right off the tip to get it all fitting just so, but for the most part it's really, really good. And so what I'm going to do now, you'll see I'm a little strong here, like by a good 3/8 of an inch top and bottom. And so in order to deal with that, I want to deal with kerfing this joint right here. So this side is still rough cut. I'm just going to use this cabinet scraper and a pencil, and I'm just going to give myself a nice little scribing line right along there. That's just going to help me do my fitting just so. Slide it up. Now that doesn't look like much, but you'd be surprised at how little has to come off one of these faces in order to get this thing to drop down to the bottom. So I'll just start by cleaning that up with my block plane and a little bit of chisel work right up here in the haunch, and then we'll fit it, try it again. And the last thing we're going to need to do, of course, is to deal with the center line joint. Okay, now I've been back in and out of here a whole bunch of times now, and I've got this joint fitting really nicely. So you can see I've got, you know, a really nice tight joint all the way along there, all the way along this plank. Now I'm still hanging up high by, if I slide this down carefully, it feels like I kind of hit the wall probably about a 1/16 of an inch short of my final position. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my time. This joint looks really good, so I'm going to stop messing around with that. I'm just going to take a couple passes on this edge at a time and then try it again. It's just a cut and fit and cut and fit. And if I hit it a couple of times and it feels like I got a gap here and it's not sitting down, it means that somewhere else in here I've got something else hanging up. And it could be down right at the very bottom where you don't have very great access. And in fact, there's sort of a ramp that gets created when this plank interacts with the transom and the knee. There's sort of a flat spot in there that's all you can do is sort of bevel off the back of this and hope that you manage to get it to take up. In fact, I think what I'll do right now is bevel off a little more of this. You can see I've sort of rounded it off there. Okay, here we go. Slide that in. A really nice tight fit there. It is 100% all the way down. I just want to make sure that I'm not... It's so hard to tell if I'm rising against the planking or whether or not it's... Yeah, I'll just give myself a little pencil mark. If I rise past that pencil mark, it means that I'm not quite there. And it's starting to slide once I hit my other surfaces. No, I'm there. That's good. Perfect. Okay, that is lovely. You can see my joint right here is nice and tight. It's perfect. Perfectly tight joint down here. Nice and tight all along here. Down at the bottom, there might be just like a 1/16 of an inch that isn't quite touching, so my length is maybe out by a hair, but that's going to fill with epoxy anyway, so I'd rather just leave it as it is and not worry about that. So I'm just going to set this into position and then clamp it so it doesn't slide around on me. Okay, that looks good. And I'm just going to carefully mark my center line there. And then again back here. Good, so I'm just going to connect those dots. I've done the same thing on the other half. What I might have to do is leave them both just the tiniest bit wide and then sneak up on the fit. Or I can not worry about it. I can back off on the fit just a little bit and we let glue fill that joint, which is not a terrible thing. You get more of a maybe a glue line, but that's not the end of the world. The other thing you can do is taper both of those joints off and then fit a wedge in there, which is absolutely doable. Kind of a pain in the butt if you ask me, and not really worth it for this. We're not building guitars here, we're building a boat. Okay, now to do a really nice accurate job of marking this line, we're going to switch to a knife. And so when you do this, you really want to go very light on your first cuts. It's super easy if you go, especially if you go overboard, to jump the ruler and slice the tip of your thumb off. I can tell you there are many carpenters out there who are missing little bits of their thumb from doing exactly that. And I know from my own experience, I've got I don't know how many cuts across these fingers from doing the exact same thing over the years. I haven't hit that thumb yet. On the saw, we'll trim this just north of the line a little bit, and then we're going to sneak up on that line with the planes. And as we get to within a few strokes of those lines, we're going to drop these both in place and make sure that they're looking 100% in the boat. Of course, let's always play safe. I always drop that guard down till it's less than a finger's depth from my work surface. The nice thing about using a knife line is when you actually hit it while planing here, you'll usually see the edge of this just starting to break away a little bit. Almost there. Back here I can see that edge breaking away. And now I can see it breaking away up here, so I'm basically halfway through that knife line, or almost. Basically I got one more stroke. Not a terrible idea to just check your angle, make sure that you're nice and square at this point. Because I'm almost there, I'm like, there's just the scantest bit of that knife line still hanging there, this little flimsy edge. I'm going to just leave this alone, clean up the other one. We're going to pop them both in the boat and have a look. Okay, so back here at the boat, slide that one in, that's just touching so. Slide that one in. And that joint looks really good. Looks really good. I can't even quite tell, actually. It almost feels like I shouldn't even take off those last couple strokes. Okay, well there we are. There's our overlay done. It looks pretty good. I'm fairly happy with it. I do have a little bit of a glue line that's going to remain down the center here that's maybe a 32nd of an inch wide. I'd love it if it wasn't there, but the effort of getting rid of it at this point really is not worth it. It's not the end of the world. It's going to look fine. It's structurally fine. It's doing the job that I needed to do, which was cleaning up all the mistakes I made underneath, and it's adding greater structure to the boat. I like that. So all I got to do is decide how I'm going to deal with gluing this in. It'll get epoxied in. What I might do actually is just put traditional bedding compound just along the edges of the planking here. That will prevent the epoxy from bonding those areas. And when I set this down in there, it will all just, it'll work out just fine. Next thing I got to figure out is how I'm going to clamp this. That's yet another adventure. Well, I hope this was useful to you. This little video was about owning your mistakes. trying to learn from them. Sometimes in the effort of fixing them, you learn something new. I definitely picked up a couple of ideas that I'll probably employ on my next build. Certainly, I discovered some things about this that, had I thought of it before, could have come in handy. Anyhow, the job is done. We fixed our mistakes. The boat looks good, maybe even looks even better now. I still have to trim the top of this down and put my doubler in up here. That's material for another video, not for this one. Ciao for now. Thanks for watching.